Ideologies and partisan affiliations in politics are waking up to the fact they need to stand up in order to fight back collectively against Donald Trump's authoritarian push. This week, Harvard drew a line in the sand. They refused to comply with the Trump administration's demands. And then a legendary conservative federal judge appointed by Ronald Reagan gave this dire warning yesterday about the shocking conduct of this administration in a blistering appeals decision. Even David Brooks, center-right leaning columnist who nobody would ever describe as a radical, wrote this in the New York Times, quote, "It's time for a comprehensive national civic uprising. It's time for Americans' universities, law, business, nonprofits, the scientific community, and civil servants and beyond to form one coordinated mass movement." Jamelle Bouie is an opinion columnist in the New York Times, where he writes, "America, this is an old and brutal tyranny," in his latest column. Tim Miller is a former spokesman for the RNC, now writer-at-large for The Bulwark, and they both join me now. Tim, I've sort of seen it all. I guess Bill Kristol the other day saying, where did the abolish ICE people go for their apology? We got David Brooks quoting Marx with nothing to lose but your chains. But I do think that something snapped into focus for folks in these sort of key institutions, I think, in the last week, 2 weeks, that like, you're not going to be able to hide your head under the covers and the monster will just go to someone else. Like, it's coming for you.
Yeah, I mean, shout out to Bill Kristol. He's been ringing the alarm bells for a few years. But yeah, look, hey, we got Bobos in the streets with David Brooks. It is a new dawn. And I think that it is just a response to reality, right? And you know, I think you saw from, you know, the groups that folded, you know, whether it be Columbia or some of the law firms, et cetera, that they didn't really seem to get anything out of it, right? Like these sort of groups, you know, Donald Trump is not the type of person, you know, when he gets somebody to give in a deal to be like, all right, sounds good, let's shake on it, right? Donald Trump's going to continue to press and continue to get more and more and more. That's how he did deals, if you want to call that, when he was a private businessman, and that's how he is as a politician. So, you know, I think the standing up to it is the necessary response. And I think it's worth mentioning Senator Van Hollen in particular, right? It's like, you know, there was a lot of frustration even among Dems. They're like, you know, maybe the right thing to do is capitulate. Maybe it's try to work with him. And it's like, no, the only way you get any actual results is by forcing the issue. And that's just the how you deal with Trump. It's how you deal with all of these, you know, wannabe authoritarian tough guys.
Yeah, and I think one of the things here, and I think Harvard's response and Van Hollen are in the same category, Jamelle, is that it actually you kind of have to put something on the line for this to work. And that's the hard part, you know? I mean, Harvard, like, they were like, we're going to take money away from you, and Harvard was like, we cannot like submit our, you know, student body to an audit if we have enough MAGA people. And then they're like, we're going to cut off your visas, we're going to, you know, come after you. Van Hollen went down to El Salvador. He was turned away by guys with M16s and a 3-star general saying you can't come in here. You still stuck around. Like, that part of it, Jamelle, that's the hard part, but also kind of the necessary part of all this working.
I think that's absolutely right. The Van Hollen example is so crucial. There is a precedent, right, for a member of Congress going to a foreign country to see what's going on with Americans who might be there. This was the congressman who went down to Jonestown back in the 70s, and he was killed in that. It represents real danger to do something like this. And Van Hollen, I think, showed real bravery in going down. Even if the odds of something happening were low, it shows bravery, it shows guts to go down and demand answers. And that kind of display, it does two things. First, it as you said, it puts things on the line and lets viewers, observers know that this is serious, but also it dramatizes the issue. And this is the thing I think Democrats have had a very hard time internalizing, which is that politics is not, it's not an indoor game. It's not something that you play with you know, Marquis of Queensberry rules. It's a game that requires action and intensity and drama. You have to dramatize things for the public. And going down to El Salvador to find and talk to Abrego Garcia creates drama. And I think there are other ways Democrats can create drama around the administration's disregard for the Constitution and rule of law. And I think that when you create that drama, people respond. People responded to Van Hollen. People responded to Cory Booker's filibuster. There is a real energy out there. People are looking for someone to perform and dramatize their anger and dismay. And I think Democrats just have to do it.
Yeah, and there's something also, courage is contagious and people react to each other. But like, Tim, we've seen this sort of mutual defense pact that we're now seeing emerge from higher education, right? That we're going to sort of stand up for each other. And then you've got lawyers who have been circulating amicus briefs in support of the firms that have chosen not to roll over and to sue the administration. That, it is a very simple lesson that organizers learn very early on, but you need numbers here. There are strength in numbers.
Yeah, there are. And, look, we could wax poetic about the value of people going to the streets, and there is value in that. I would also just point out the practical value of the stall. Right?
Yes.
You saw for the first, whatever it was, 80 days, where there was not a lot of pushback into Trump, how quickly the administration moved from one thing to the next, right? And there is, at this point, every minute they spend fighting the courts over Abrego Garcia is a minute or a day that there's not someone else pulled off the streets and sent to El Salvador because of their tattoos, right? It's the same thing with the universities, right? The universities standing up now is going to, they are now going to have to fight this battle in court, and that's going to take manpower, and that's going to take time, and that's means that they're not going to be going after Berkeley or USC or whoever they want to go after next. And so I do think that there is a time limit. It's very long and it feels long with Trump, but there is a limit on it, and certainly there's a limit till the midterms. And I think this sort of fighting is practically valuable in addition to the courage is contagious element of it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, go ahead, Jamel.
No, I just wanted to make an analogy that I think works here, that the Confederate Army, its battle plan in the beginning of the war was just to score as many stunning victories to kind of sue the North into submission. But as soon as it began to slow down, giving time for their opponent to mobilize, figure out what's actually happening, and figure out a strategy to fight, things began to reverse, even with occasional tactical victories. And I think that is a dynamic that can be operative here.
Yeah, the sort of speed is of the utmost. I mean, you saw that today. I mean, literally today, what we started our show with was, I think, again, we don't know for sure, but from all the information we have, this is what it appears it looks like happened. They tried to get a bunch of detained immigrants, give them sort of bare notice that they're being sent possibly to this third country gulag, and get them on a plane before anyone could stop them. And they rushed into court, and we put cameras on them. And it looks like they turned those buses around, and they're not doing it tonight. Were they going to do it? I don't know. But that point about delay, I think, is really key. There's more protests planned this weekend. They've been happening every weekend. These are the 50501 protests and a National Day of Action, No Kings protests. So those keep going, and they keep growing every weekend. Jamel Bowie and Tim Miller. Great to have you guys on tonight. Thank you both.
Thank you.
That is all in for the week. The Rachel Maddow Show starts right now. Good evening, Rachel.
Good evening, Chris. Fantastic. Your conversation about the way the tariffs work and how a kitchen gadget and our desire for a kitchen gadget, somebody inventing a kitchen gadget, how that works through the economy and what's going to be shut down was one of the first explications of...
Oh, that's great.
What tariffs are going to mean that made me actually understand it viscerally. I thought that was really beautifully done.
That's great. It was a light bulb moment for me, too. So all credit to Betsy Stevens. That was illuminating.
Yeah. She was great. Thank you, Chris. Have a great weekend, my friend.
You too.
And thanks to at home for joining us this hour. Happy Friday. It is Friday, at least. Tonight, it is April 18th, and that means tonight is the 250-year anniversary of Paul Revere's famous Midnight Ride, to warn that the British troops were coming. The secret signal went up in the steeple of Old North Church in Boston. The code was planned in advance. They would hang one lantern in the steeple if the troops were coming by land. They would hang two lanterns in the steeple if the troops were coming by sea. The signal that Paul Revere saw was 2 lanterns. They were coming by sea. They were coming across the Charles River. And Paul Revere set off on horseback a race to Lexington and Concord to warn everyone, to rouse the militia. And it was a successful warning. The colonists were ready the next morning at dawn for what became the first battle of the Revolutionary War, to free ourselves from British rule, to free ourselves from a king. Tonight, Old North Church in Boston, which still stands, they rang their bells at 6 p.m. tonight, and churches all over the country rang their bells to commemorate the start of our revolution. It happened everywhere, all over the country tonight at 6. I was working, prepping the show, and I heard the church down the block from me ringing its bells. I ran outside and instantly burst into tears because I'm a complete sap. But if you heard your local church, or you heard anybody on street corners, anybody out ringing bells today, that was why. It's to commemorate the start of the American Revolution 250 years ago. When I mentioned this anniversary on last night's show, you might remember we showed pictures of Old North Church in Boston. What we showed last night, though, when we had those images of Old North Church, those weren't live shots. We were just showing you the file photos that we had on hand. I found out after we got off the air last night that while we were doing that segment on the show, this is actually what, at that moment, the steeple of Old North Church looked like. Something was being projected on it as I spoke those words last night on this show about this church. You can see it says there, this is a projection on the Old North. Let the warning ride forth once more. Tyranny is at our door. And then it's a projection, so they can change it over to other things. And then there was this one. This is quite good. I kind of can't believe I didn't think of this myself. 1 if by land, 2 if by D.C. Old North Church in Boston. Tomorrow, on the 250th anniversary of those first battles in our revolution, the 250th anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord, the battles that we won, that started the war, that we won to free us forever from ever suffering again under the tyranny of a king. Tomorrow, on that 250th anniversary, we are expecting another Saturday with protests in every state in the country. I think at every state capital in the country, but also in general in more than 1,000 locations all across the country. Much like we saw 2 weeks ago at the hands-off protests, people saying no kings. National Day of Protest tomorrow, April 19th. No kings, people expressing their opposition to this presidency. In the last 24 hours, we've seen Americans protesting in Eagan, Minnesota, against cuts to the VA. We saw Americans protesting within the last 24 hours in Annapolis, Maryland, protesting just outside the high walls of the U.S. Naval Academy after the Academy banned books from its library on orders from the president. WBAL covering that protest in Annapolis and also posting a list of the banned books on their website to accompany their story, which actually is very helpful. That's the list of books that were removed from Nimitz Library at the U.S. Naval Academy. In Foley, Alabama, in Deep Red, Alabama, there was a peaceful protest and also a counter-protest outside an event where Republican Congressman Barry Moore was speaking. We saw students and faculty at colleges all over the country yesterday protesting Trump's threats to universities and colleges and his arrests of international students, protests at American University in Washington, D.C., protests at Cal State Long Beach, protests at UCLA, protests at UC Berkeley, protests for the second time in a week at Florida International University in Miami, protests at the University of Albany in New York, protests at Northwestern in Illinois, which is one of the universities that has been targeted already by Trump. He's trying to take away federal funding and grant funding from them. Also protests at Columbia University, which very famously has been targeted by Trump. Also protests in downtown Manhattan near the campus of NYU. Also protests at the University of Houston in Texas and at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. We also just saw another large protest outside the ICE headquarters in New York. We saw a large protest in Elizabeth, New Jersey, over local fears by local residents that Union County, New Jersey, where Elizabeth is, they may contract with ICE to put an immigration prison there, a so-called detention facility there for ICE. Local residents coming out and saying that they will not stand for it. A couple of weeks ago, you might remember us reporting on a big feisty protest at a little tiny airport in New Haven, Connecticut. They've got an airport there called Tweed Airport. And there's a small airline called Avelo, A-V-E-L-O, that runs out of that airport, among others. They market themselves, I guess, as like New Haven's hometown airline. I don't know exactly what that means, but bottom line, they're marketing themselves as a consumer airline for the general public, but they are also simultaneously signing a huge contract with the Trump administration to use Avelo flights and aircraft and their flight attendants and everything for deportation flights. I don't know how you market yourself to the general public while telling the general public, oh, also our flights and flight attendants and planes are being used by Trump to send people to other countries. But these protests against Avelo Airline at New Haven Airport I thought was going to be a one-off thing. It's now becoming a regular thing, and they are getting bigger over time. At this latest one, protesters were joined by the U.S. Senator from Connecticut, Richard Blumenthal, there alongside the protesters. And, you know, there's no shortage of stuff that the Trump administration is doing that would be a stop the presses moment in any other administration. It's just that he's doing so many of these things at once that they can get lost in the sauce, right? I mean, Trump just this week has revealed a budget plan that will entirely eliminate the Head Start program everywhere in the country. This would have been a month's worth of headlines in any other administration. I mean, Head Start is preschool. And Trump is going to cut it to zero. Nearly 50% of all Head Start funding in the whole country goes to rural areas in which there often is no other child care option available for young parents. Head Start is it. And Trump is zeroing out Head Start. Zero. He's eliminating it. This week, Trump has yanked all AmeriCorps volunteers off their projects all across the country. AmeriCorps is like the Peace Corps, but here at home, it sends young people aged 18 to 26 all around the country to do disaster response and conservation projects and education. They do things like building housing for veterans. They just do good works on a voluntary basis in every state in the country. And they do it in exchange for helping pay for college. It is considered to be a 100% successful program. It is broadly popular and non-controversial with both parties. Trump himself supported it and funded it in his first term. But now, inexplicably and without warning, he has ended all AmeriCorps volunteer assignments right now in the middle of this week, pulled all of those people out of what they were doing all over the country, effective immediately, no warning, no explanation. And they are cutting virtually all the staff of the agency that oversees the volunteers and makes sure the program runs. Why is Trump doing that? Do you remember Trump running for office saying he was going to kill AmeriCorps? Get rid of all those kids building housing for veterans. Yeah, and we're going to get rid of preschool, too. Am I right? I mean, you remember that from his rallies? They were hard to pay attention to. They were long, but I don't remember that. Who's clamoring for this? AmeriCorps volunteers are already suing Trump to stop what he's doing. Now California's governor, Gavin Newsom, says the state of California is going to sue him over this as well. We shall see. But that's, like I said, one among many. Trump has now fired so many people at the National Weather Service that the agency yesterday sent out a blanket notice advising their staff that they're going to need to reduce or suspend weather balloon launches all over the country. Weather balloon launches make weather forecasts accurate. The former administrator of NOAA tells USA Today that that factor and the staff shortages imposed by Trump are already degrading our weather forecasts in this country. Washington Post reports that the number of meteorologists on staff at some local forecast offices is now half their normal staffing or less in multiple locations, and that is permanent and likely to get worse with what else Trump has in store for the National Weather Service and NOAA. Quote, as severe storm season ramps up, it's the offices in places such as Kansas City, Omaha, Louisville, Des Moines, and Grand Rapids that are facing the most significant staffing shortages. And on top of that, to stop people who work in these agencies from letting the press and the public know about what Trump is doing to the Weather Service, to stop people from talking about how their weather forecasts are degrading because of what Trump is doing to the Weather Service, The Washington Post reports that the Trump administration is now, quote, installing monitoring software on NOAA employees' devices to track their communications, so they can make sure they're not talking to the public and not talking to the press about the way Trump is decimating the Weather Service. Yesterday, the Trump administration tried to force through a basically total reduction in force at the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It would have effectively fired the entire staff of the agency. The staff of that agency, I will tell you, is feisty as heck. They got the firing notices yesterday afternoon. They were all supposed to be fired as of 6 o'clock tonight, but they figured out a way to get themselves in front of a federal judge this morning before today's 6 p.m. deadline, and that judge this morning blocked the firings. The judge, quote, told attorneys for the government she was deeply concerned about the apparently rushed efforts to implement a reduction in force of approximately 1,500 employees at the CFPB, which was set to take effect at 6 p.m. tonight. The judge said the move by the Trump administration could be in direct violation of an injunction she had put in place already. That injunction required terminations at the agency to be carried out only after a particularized assessment of individual employees' performance. The judge told attorneys from the Trump administration that this reduction in force thing that they tried to force through today, quote, is not going to happen in the meantime. The judge ordered the Trump administration to advise agency leadership that they need to make that clear to employees who had been informed they would be ousted. In other words, the judge is telling CFPB, not only are you not firing those people today, which you were trying to do, but you are going to tell them that they are not being fired, because they all got notices from you saying they're fired as of today. You must notify them that they are not being fired. ABC News reports, quote, many of those employees sat in her courtroom Friday, and several broke into tears following the hearing. The judge in this case has also set a hearing for a week and a half from now, April 28th. She says she wants testimony from at least one Trump administration official and potentially one member of DOJ about what they tried to do here with trying to fire the whole agency. She says she's basically going to get to the bottom of whether they've violated her court order with this attempt to fire these people, which, again, they did not get away with, which she blocked, and which they now have to answer for as potentially having violated a lawful court order. Like I said, those CFPB employees are feisty. Every time there's a court hearing, they are filling the gallery. Every time there is anything going on with their agency, every single thing that they have tried to shiv that agency with, they have not only fought back, but they have shown up in person. And it matters, and it is working, and they are still there hanging on. There is no shortage of fight, in no shortage of people, for no shortage of things that Trump is doing. But one issue in particular keeps rising to the top. And it's because of the extremism of what Trump is doing specifically to immigrants. And it is just lighting up the country right now. We've been covering this all this week in particular, but it really is every day. In Washtenaw County, Michigan this week, local residents packed into a county commissioners meeting. They filled up the room. They filled up the overflow room. They filled up the hallway outside of both after the Trump administration threatened that county and demanded that that county needed to effectively inform to the Trump administration on local residents and even on county employees, presumably so people could be targeted by Trump's immigration agents. The county is showing no signs of budging on that, and the community is backing them up on it. They packed this hearing. You can see this headline in the local news in MLive here. Quote, residents make emotional pleas to support immigrants as feds demand information. Residents packed a meeting of Washtenaw County Board of Commissioners to express support for the immigrant community. Quote, we do not want you to cave from the pressure you are under. This video, you will remember this video. It is likely seared in your mind already. This was a doctoral student from Tufts University being grabbed off the street by Trump's masked agents, screaming in fear as they grabbed her hands and chained her and put her in an unmarked vehicle. Her name is Rumeysa Ozturk. She was a Fulbright scholar and a PhD student. She's here in this country on a student visa. She has been in an immigration prison in Louisiana since she was grabbed off the street by agents. But today, a federal judge ordered that she must be flown out of Louisiana. She must be flown back to New England, specifically to Vermont, so she can attend a court hearing there in person about her case. A federal judge in Vermont ordered that she must be brought back to New England by May 1st. Her hearing is May 9th. Today in Boston, a different federal judge issued an injunction that blocks Trump from deporting people to random third countries to which they have no relationship and to which no court has ordered them to be sent, at least not without giving that person a chance to make the case that they might be in danger if they were sent there. And I'm not going to read you the whole thing. I know it's my want to read court rulings at length. I'm just going to read you just a paragraph from this ruling. But this is one of those rulings you can almost feel like it might be written in all capital letters. It's not, but it has that vibe. It is making the point of this ruling very, very, very clear. Let me read to you what the judge said. Quote, defendants, meaning the Trump administration, defendants argue that the United States may send a deportable alien to a country not of their origin, not where an immigration judge has ordered, where they may be immediately tortured and killed, without providing that person any opportunity to tell the deporting authorities that they face grave danger or death because of such a deportation. All 9 sitting justices of the United States Supreme Court, the Assistant Solicitor General of the United States Congress, the Assistant Solicitor General of the United States Congress, I'm going to start again, sorry. All 9 justices of the Supreme Court of the United States, the Assistant Solicitor General of the United States, Congress, common sense, basic decency, and this court all disagree with that contention from the defendants. Now, this ruling will stop some of what Trump is trying to do in sending people to random countries they're not connected to. The class to which this ruling applies includes any non-citizen who's had a final order of removal from this country. So it's people who have gone through the immigration process and from a court received an order of removal. That, however, is not the circumstance for most of the people who the Trump administration has been shipping to El Salvador, to the lawless, bizarre, draconian forever prison there from which the U.S. government purports to not even have the power to remove people and return people that it admits it's sent there by mistake. The Washington Post reported late last night that the whole basis the Trump administration has cited for why it's using that Salvadoran prison, for why it's using the Wartime Alien Enemies Act to send people to that prison, why it's using the Alien Enemies Act to deny any kind of due process at all for the people they're shipping to that prison. The Trump administration's justification for doing that is because, in their minds, what they've affirmed in saying that's why they're using that law is that they contend that the United States is at war with Venezuela. And that's the justification for Trump using that law. And that comes as a surprise, right? Did you know we were at war with Venezuela? The whole legal basis for the Trump administration claiming the right to do this in the way they've been doing it is that they say there is this criminal gang in Venezuela, this Tren de Aragua gang, and the Trump administration's contention is that that gang, that criminal gang, isn't just a gang. Well, it is a gang, but they're also another thing, which gives Trump kind of magic legal powers. Their contention is that that gang has supposedly been, deployed here on orders from Venezuela's president. Like he has sent them here as a little undercover army to invade us at his command on behalf of the government of Venezuela as a way of that country waging war against our country. And so they're like an army that we're fighting against because we're at war with that country. I know it's right. That's seriously their legal rationale for what Trump has done with this El Salvadoran prison. Okay? Here's the Washington Post late last night. Quote, headline, U.S. intelligence contradicts Trump's justification for mass deportations. Quote, the National Intelligence Council, drawing on the acumen of the United States' 18 intelligence agencies, determined in a secret assessment early this month that the Venezuelan government is not directing an invasion of the United States by the prison gang Tren de Aragua. Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act in mid-March, proclaiming without evidence that Tren de Aragua is perpetrating an invasion of the United States at the direction of the regime of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Nevertheless, quote, the intelligence product found that the gang, quote, does not operate at the direction of Venezuela's leader. This finding builds on U.S. intelligence findings from February as well, that the gang is not controlled by Venezuela. The legal rationale for sending all these people to this prison in El Salvador appears to be a very tissue-thin fiction. But a U.S. senator just today got back from El Salvador from trying to get one of his own constituents out of that prison. And now tonight, the ACLU has been fighting in an emergency court hearing in Washington and now in an emergency application to the United States Supreme Court to try to stop Trump from what they think is yet another effort by the Trump administration tonight to prepare more planefuls of men to be shipped off to that prison. This is a legal drama, a legal emergency that has been unfolding tonight. It is unfolding now as we speak. We're going to get the latest on it and expert help to understand it. Next. Stay with us. The small town of Anson, Texas, has a population of just over 2,000 people. Since 2019, Anson has been home to a big immigration prison, a 1,000-bed, what they call an ICE detention facility. They call it the Bluebonnet Detention Center. The following account was given last night by an immigration lawyer who's representing someone who's being held at that facility, a teenager born in 2006 who has applied for asylum in this country. The lawyer says his client, the teenager, quote, was detained in Virginia on March 14th by immigration agents, along with other relatives. Agents stated that a photograph found on Facebook proved the teenager was a member of Tren de Aragua and that one of the persons in the photograph had a gun. The teenager pointed out to the agents that the gun in question was, in fact, a water pistol. Sometime between April 14th and April 16th, the teenager was transferred to Bluebonnet Detention Facility in Texas, as was his father. Last night, the teenager's lawyer received notice through the young man's father that the teenager had been taken away by agents. The agents returned for the teenager's belongings. As he passed by, the teenager's father could see through a window that his son was crying. As the son and the agents were passing, the son held up a paper to the window. Another detainee who spoke English was able to read that the paper said, deportation. For the past month, the Trump administration has been using the same wartime law that was used for Japanese internment camps during World War II to arrest men from Venezuela and then fly them to a prison in a foreign country without any legal proceeding of any kind. Their legal pretext is a hard-to-follow claim that somehow the United States is at war, like we were in World War II, I guess, except we're at war with Venezuela, which none of us knew. But that regardless means no due process for these men that they are arresting and imprisoning abroad, potentially for the rest of their lives. About a week and a half ago, the U.S. Supreme Court told the Trump administration that if it wants to use that law, it needs to give the people it wants to fly out of the country the opportunity to go before a court. It needs to give them the opportunity to contest the grounds for their removal. But according to the ACLU, last night, a bunch of people in that detention center in Anson, Texas, that Bluebonnet Detention Center, including that teenager, were told that they were going to be deported, quote, within 24 hours. The ACLU says some of them had allegedly, quote, already been loaded onto buses, headed to some airport to fly them out of the country. Just before we got on the air tonight, NBC News got this video of one bus and one van leaving that detention center, that Bluebonnet Detention Center in Anson, Texas. We don't know who, if anyone, whether it was a passenger on that bus. We don't know where that bus was going. This afternoon, the ACLU rushed to 4 different courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court, to try to stop those people from being shipped out of the country, possibly to that notorious prison in El Salvador, where the Trump administration claims it has no authority to get people out once they are there, which is really something, given that it's giving them no day in court, no due process at all before it sends them there. Tonight, a federal judge in Washington was the first to weigh in. That judge held an emergency hearing. A Trump administration lawyer told the court that he had no knowledge of any planes set to depart with immigrants on it tonight or tomorrow. But he said the administration reserves the right to deport people under the Alien Enemies Act. The ACLU explained that the Trump attorney's inability to share departure plans in court tonight, quote, does not give us much confidence that people will not be deported right away. The judge responded that he was, quote, sympathetic to the ACLU's concerns, but did not believe that he had the authority to rule on this matter because none of the plaintiffs are being held in Washington, D.C. Like I said, this is a fast-evolving story. This is a legal drama that is still unfolding as we speak tonight. The question right now is, will the Fifth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals act tonight? Will the U.S. Supreme Court act tonight before potentially more immigrants are flown out of this country, perhaps irreparably and irrevocably, to a foreign prison from which the U.S. says they can never be retrieved? If the Fifth Circuit or the United States Supreme Court does not act tonight, what do we believe will happen to the men in that Texas detention center and possibly on that bus? Joining us now is Aaron Reichlin-Melnick. He's an immigration attorney and senior fellow at the American Immigration Council. He's been closely following this case. Mr. Reichlin-Melnick, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
I'm not a lawyer and I'm not an expert in immigration law. Let me just ask you, first of all, if I explained any of that wrong or missed anything important about what we understand about this case thus far.
I think you've got the core of it. There are people that may be on a bus or may be waiting to be put on buses, and that the government has said they will not send them to El Salvador or deport them under the Alien Enemies Act tomorrow, but they haven't promised that they won't put them on a plane at 12:01 a.m. on Sunday morning.
In terms of what the district court judge said tonight in Washington, D.C., he expressed that he was essentially sympathetic to the case that was being made by the plaintiffs here, but he felt constrained by how the Supreme Court has ruled in cases of this type already. What do you make of the judge's essentially saying tonight that he was inclined to act but felt his hands were tied?
Yeah, this is Judge Boasberg, the same judge who the Supreme Court previously reversed his temporary restraining order, which had blocked the use of this ancient law in the past. And what the Supreme Court said was that these cases need to be brought in habeas corpus relief. Now, the ACLU has said in front of Judge Boasberg, look, this is something slightly different. We want you to rule that the process that the government is using is wrong. They need to use a different process. But that's a bit complicated. And so Judge Boasberg said, at this moment, with the fact that you have all these other pending cases in different places in Texas, which is closer to where the action is going on, I don't feel comfortable at this point to weigh in. But he did get the government to commit to at least that there supposedly isn't going to be any flight tomorrow.
Right, and we should make clear, Judge Boasberg is the judge that initially ordered the first planes that were heading to El Salvador to turn around mid-flight, and the Trump administration didn't do it. We're still now litigating the consequences of that. But I feel like because that water is under the bridge, and the men who were on those planes that didn't turn around are still, and perhaps forever now, locked up in that El Salvadoran prison, because since then, the Trump administration has articulated with glee that they feel utterly powerless to ever retrieve anybody from that prison. And once they're there, the U.S. washes their hands of them, and El Salvador can do with them as they will, and they don't think those people will ever get out. The Supreme Court is aware of all of those things right now. Frankly, the Fifth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals is aware of all of those things right now. If they believe, as the ACLU suspects, that those planes are going to leave Texas and fly yet more men irrevocably to that El Salvadoran prison, if not tomorrow, then Sunday, if not Sunday, then Monday. Do you believe the Supreme Court, in the reasoning that we've seen from them thus far, will be inclined to try to stop Trump from doing that?
I think the Trump administration is very clearly trying to push the boundaries of what the Supreme Court ruled. Because in the Alien Enemies Act case, the Supreme Court was extremely clear. Every person subject to this law has a right to due process. And the Supreme Court said that the one thing the Trump administration has to do, if it wants to use this law, is ensure that people are given notice that they're going to be subject to the law, and they're given enough time, reasonable time, and in a manner as will allow them to actually seek habeas relief. So enough time to actually go to a court and file a lawsuit. The ACLU says this should be at minimum 30 days, which is what people were given in World War II. The Trump administration seems to be taking the position that reasonable time could be less than 24 hours. And of course, these are people who don't even necessarily speak English, who are handed notices in English telling them they're about to be deported under this law. So the ACLU is saying you have to give more time. And if you don't, you're breaking what the Supreme Court said you have to do.
Right. You're breaking the principle that you said was operative here, even for these cases. Yes. Thank you for helping us understand that. Aaron Reichlin-Melnick is an immigration attorney and a senior fellow at the American Immigration Council. And I just want to say, Aaron, that your public communications on this, your statements online, your use of social media to explain some of these things as they've been going. We've got lawyers on staff. We talk to all sorts of different people and reporters and our own team about this stuff all the time. You've been really helpful at explaining the stuff to the public in a way that I think makes a lot more people understand it than otherwise would. So I thank you for doing that, and I'd encourage you to keep that up. It's a real service to your country.
Thank you very much.
All right. We got more news here ahead tonight. Stay with us. In a much bigger story, but sometimes those little throwaway lines are very helpful, and they really stick with me. I'll show you what I mean. Here's the headline in the Wall Street Journal. The headline is, anxious trading partners promise to buy American to stave off Trump's tariffs. And you've seen a million articles like this, right? The bulk of the article under that headline is about what you would expect. Again, you've seen a lot like this. It's about various countries trying to strike deals with the U.S. so they can get themselves some relief, some favored treatment from Trump amid his gigantic, catastrophic world tariff experiment. So the countries are trying to get themselves some kind of relief, and among those discussed in this article is the nation of Vietnam. According to the Wall Street Journal, Vietnam has been trying to fend off harsh treatment under Trump's tariffs by, number one, buying American jets. Number two, allowing the Starlink internet service that's owned by Donald Trump's top campaign donor, Elon Musk, to operate inside their country. Weird that they decided that was a good idea. And number three, here's the kicker. Vietnam has also, quote, decided to accelerate the approvals for a $1.5 billion Trump resort in Vietnam. Oh, weird how that might get you better treatment from the U.S. government. I mean, I'm sure Vietnam has lots of good reasons to make sure a Trump Organization resort project is moving forward. Lots and lots and lots of them. It's weird that they think that might be correlated with the U.S. government giving them some sort of favorable treatment. But let's just stick a pin in that one for a second. There's another story I want to tell you. And I will tell you, even though I'm going to use the word cryptocurrency in telling you this story, don't worry, you don't have to understand anything about cryptocurrency in order to get this story. But here it is. A couple of years ago, the Justice Department accused an online cryptocurrency company that's called Binance of being basically a supermarket for crime. DOJ accused Binance of being a giant money laundering hub for terrorists and cyber criminals and customers in sanctioned countries like Iran and Russia. Binance pled guilty. They paid over $4 billion. That was the largest fine ever in the history of crypto. Its founder spent 4 months in prison. Ever since, Binance has been overseen by U.S. government-appointed monitors who ensure that Binance is no longer a supermarket for crime. It is now following the law and making sure Binance is only operating overseas and not operating in the United States at all. Now, Binance, naturally, they would very much like to get out from under that oversight, and they would very much like to operate in the United States again. But to do that, they need to get these pesky government monitors off their back. They need the U.S. government to decide they are out of the doghouse. And it would make their return easier, of course, if their founder were no longer a convicted felon. Well, when Donald Trump won the election last year, Binance sensed opportunity. This is also from the Wall Street Journal, quote, at an Abu Dhabi crypto conference last December, weeks before the inauguration, in the whales-only back room accessible to attendees who had paid $10,000 for a VIP pass, Binance's founder mingled with Trump's son Eric, and Trump allies. Eric was there to promote World Liberty, a crypto venture the Trump family had founded months earlier. For World Liberty, Binance's market power could help turn it into a serious player in the crypto industry. Binance has more than 250 million users. The more World Liberty cryptocurrency in circulation, of course, quote, the more the Trump family could profit. Again, ignore the word, like, cryptocurrency. This could be anything. I mean, say the Trump family had launched a new company that makes doohickeys. Well, Binance, if they partnered with the Trump family in this enterprise, they could get Trump doohickeys in front of hundreds of millions of potential customers, which would, of course, mean lots of profit for the Trump family. That is what Binance is offering to the Trump family. What does Binance want? Well, their convicted felon founder, quote, has been pushing for a Trump administration pardon, has been pushing for the Trump administration to grant him a pardon. And the Wall Street Journal reports, quote, executives from Binance met with Treasury Department officials last month and discussed loosening U.S. government oversight on the company. Quote, Binance executives are optimistic the Trump administration will acquiesce. Oh, they are they? Maybe that's because, as president, Donald Trump has already pardoned a whole slew of crypto felons, and his Justice Department has just disbanded its crypto policing unit. And also because Trump's SEC halted an investigation of another crypto executive after that executive dumped $75 million into the Trump family crypto company. So if the Wall Street Journal's reporting on this bears out, this is not even like... This isn't even like textbook corruption, because you would not need to get to the level of school that uses textbooks in order to get to this level of understanding of corruption. This is like a coloring book of corruption. This is like corruption that you could understand if you'd never been to any school ever, anywhere. In any other time in American history, this scandal, 1/10 of this scandal, would be the end of a presidency. But this is just like day that ends in Y. This is our life now. We'll be right back. You know, this man, his name is Billy Long. He is not an accountant. He's not a tax lawyer. He has no background in tax, like bookkeeping or math or anything that would be a typical credential for somebody who was appointed to lead the IRS. His only relevant credential appears to be that he used to be a member of Congress. He then tried to run for Senate in 2022, and he lost his Senate race. Billy Long is one of the last big Trump nominees who has not yet been confirmed. And that's bad timing because, whoo boy, the work is really piling up over at the IRS. But look at this. Just this week, 2 Democratic senators on the Finance Committee wrote to the IRS asking the agency to open a criminal investigation into a handful of companies that they say have been selling tax credits that don't actually exist. And that obviously is problematic on its face, but it's even more concerning that Billy Long, Trump's choice to run the IRS, has, quote, direct financial ties to some of the companies implicated in this alleged scheme. The senators write that one of the companies, a company called Lifetime Advisors, hired Billy Long to do substantial work for it. The senators say the other company, called White River Energy, paid Billy Long thousands of dollars for some kind of referral fee. Now, the senators say that it's unclear what role, if any, Billy Long played in promoting these bogus tax credits that allegedly don't exist. But either way, these senators want the IRS to launch a criminal investigation into these firms that ran what they called a fraudulent scheme, including these firms that reportedly have direct financial ties to Trump's pick to run the IRS. And you kind of wish that was the end of the story, but of course it isn't. I mentioned that Billy Long tried to run for Senate and lost a couple years ago. During that race, Billy Long loaned his campaign a bunch of his own personal money. And when he lost, the campaign was in debt, which means the campaign owed money to Billy, to him personally. He's out of it, out of pocket himself. As of last year, 2 years out from that failed Senate campaign, Billy Long was still in the hole by a lot. $130,000 he had given to his campaign. His campaign had never been able to pay it back. And that's where this really gets interesting because, let's see, November, Trump gets elected president. December, he announces Billy Long as his choice to run the IRS. And then look what happens next. Quote, after Trump named Billy Long to head the IRS, Long's campaign committee suddenly raked in nearly $137,000 in less than 3 weeks in January. Money that Long then used to pay himself back, according to disclosure documents filed this week. This is reported by the news organization The Lever this week. But I mean, great news for Billy, right? He got all his money back. Trump gets elected in November. He names Billy in December. January, ka-ching! Right after Trump names him to run the IRS, all of a sudden that long-standing debt, money owed to Billy, gets paid off. Where did that money come from? Quote, at least 1/3 of the money came from donors working at firms in the tax consultancy industry or involved in major tax-related legal battles, including financial advisors for White River Energy and Lifetime Advisors. Those are the ones that paid Billy Long thousands of dollars, who 2 U.S. senators say should be investigated by the IRS for fraud. All his debts cleared. Amazing. Right after he gets picked to run the IRS. We asked for comment from Billy Long and from the companies involved. We have not heard back. We'll let you know if we do. More ahead tonight. Stay with us. Hey, can I just ask you, do you know that we have a newsletter thing that's free? Do you want to get the newsletter? Our newsletter has clips from the show. It has the latest posts from Maddow blog. Steve Bannon writes the Maddow blog. It's fantastic. It's very newsy. It's quick. If you want to get the newsletter, you can subscribe to it for free by using the QR code on your screen. Just take out your phone, open the camera, point it at that speckled blob, and that'll give you a link to msnbc.com/Maddow newsletter. Or you can just go there directly, msnbc.com/Maddow newsletter to sign up for that newsletter. I hope you will. All right, now it's time for the last word with Ali Velshi. Good evening, Ali.
I'm taking notes, speckled blob, because for the longest time I referred to it as a barcode, because I'm a man of a certain age, and people started texting me and says it's not a barcode. The barcode is the thing in the grocery store. It's a QR code.
Speckled blob, I think, is what the kids say.
Everybody who's watching understood exactly what you meant, and I bet you there's been a whole lot of subscription to the newsletter, which is great, by the way. And I love how Steve Bannon's mind works, because he's able to do everything I write turns out like an essay, and it's really long and really detailed, and okay, maybe. And Steve just boom, he just gives you a point, and it moves on. It's pretty impressive.
He's straight to the point. And the thing, I've known Steve for decades now. He has never forgotten a single thing in all of the decades I have known him. His mind is a steel trap.
Yes.
So if this is like a thing that happened in 1987,
he'll know.
He's got it, instant recall, and it's right there.
Well,
so,
the newsletter's worth it. Thank you, my friend. You have a great weekend. See you next week.
You too.
All right, we begin with the breaking news that we have been reporting all night on out of Texas. NBC News reports the Department of Homeland Security appeared on Friday to be preparing to send a new group of Venezuelan men from the United States to El Salvador and its notorious Secot prison, even as lawyers from the American Civil Liberties Union scrambled in the courts to stop the administration from moving forward. On Friday afternoon, a charter bus rolled up to the Blue Bonnet Detention Center in Anson, Texas. It's a town about 200 miles west of Dallas, where the men are being held. U.S. District Court Judge James Boasberg, who's been hearing a case related to the flights to El Salvador, scheduled an emergency hearing for Friday evening, tonight. Not long before the emergency hearing was scheduled to begin, ACLU attorneys also asked the Supreme Court to step in. The hearing ended earlier tonight, just before 8 p.m. Here to tell us what has happened and where we are is MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. Lisa, this is... everybody in the country's following it, but it's complicated. It's got a bunch of judges and courts involved, some contradictory decisions by the courts, but not as important as the fact that the government continues to find remarkably effective ways to evade doing something, including not sending more people to El Salvador.
That's absolutely true. And Ali, when I think about the Abrego Garcia case that's captivated a lot of attention, there's a ton of emphasis on the word facilitate, with different people taking different interpretations of what that word means.
Right.
The case before us tonight, this is the Alien Enemies case that's been litigated before Judge James Boasberg and has since been moved into other courts due to a Supreme Court decision. What we are debating tonight really is the meaning of the word reasonable. And here's why. The Supreme Court decided on April 7th that if you were going to challenge what was happening on March 15th, when the president issued his proclamation that members of Tren de Aragua could be deported because they were subject to the Alien Enemies Act, when he made that decision, the Supreme Court said, look, if you want to challenge that, you have to do it in a particular way, and you have to do it in particular places. Specifically, you have to bring a form of relief known as a habeas petition, and you have to bring it in the places where people are detained. That meant that they vacated Judge Boasberg's orders, but they said you have to give people in the future reasonable notice and an opportunity to be heard.
Right.
And it's that lack of reasonable notice and an opportunity to be heard that sent the ACLU back to Judge Boasberg tonight, asking for an order saying that reasonable notice is 30 days notice.
Got it. The absence of reasonable notice, for those of us who get our legal training from Law and Order, is that people are just disappearing. I mean, that's the concept, that people are disappeared. Judge Boasberg, Judge Zinnes, and others have said, if the government has cases against these people, make the case in court. They are increasingly, I don't want to use the term dodging the courts, they're working their way around these court judgments, and they're playing this out in the media, in social media, right? You're hearing everything you're hearing about Abrego Garcia in the media. If there's a case, if the government says, this guy's that dangerous, and he's a terrorist, and he's a member of a gang, and he's this and that and the other thing, take it to court and get his protection from being deported taken away.
That's absolutely true. The government is trying to avoid, the government doesn't have an affirmative responsibility to bring a court case. We're used to immigration proceedings where somebody is subject to a proceeding started by the government, and then they get to contest an order of removal. That's not how things work under the Alien Enemies Act, and that's why the Supreme Court said, before you take these people, deport them out of the country, you have to give them reasonable notice and an opportunity to be heard. If I can, Ali, I want to share with your viewers part of what the Supreme Court said on April 7th, because it sets the groundwork for what happened today. They are saying the detainees are entitled to notice and opportunity to be heard appropriate to the nature of the case. In this context, Alien Enemies Act detainees must receive notice after the date of this order that they are subject to removal under the Act. The notice must be afforded within a reasonable time, and here's the key language, and in such a manner as will allow them to actually seek habeas relief and the proper venue before such removal occurs. And let me then take you back to the ACLU, because they are receiving notifications that clients of theirs or other people across the country have gotten notices served on them in detention facilities that says, you're getting a notice that we believe you to be a member of Tren de Aragua. We're going to deport you. This is a notice that you will be deported. And then it says, if you choose to make a phone call, we'll let you make a phone call. But never does it say you have the right to contest this. You have an opportunity to contest this. You have this much time to call a lawyer. None of that is present. The problem tonight is Judge Boasberg said, I sympathize with all the arguments you're making about the unreasonability of this notice, and yet my hands are tied because on April 7th, the Supreme Court said, this doesn't belong in front of me. Nobody is detained here in Washington, D.C. Therefore, I have no more jurisdiction, and that's why Legal Learned and his colleagues are waiting tonight to see if the Fifth Circuit of the U.S. Court of Appeals or the United States Supreme Court is going to intervene and prevent the deportation of these people before the U.S. government can spirit them away. We got a representation from the government lawyer today that he understands there will be no flights tonight. But as for tomorrow, he said this, the government has no plans for flights tomorrow, but they reserve the right to take flights consistent with what they understand the Supreme Court ruling to be.
And we don't know, with 2 hours to go till midnight, whether the Fifth Circuit or the Supreme Court will respond to the ACLU.
No, I kept hitting refresh right before we went to air. No notice from either of them.
Thank you for your explanations, my friend. Good to see you.
Good to
Lisa
see you
Rubin. All right, staying with the controversy of deportations to El Salvador, it's been 18 days since the Trump administration first acknowledged that Kilmar Abrego Garcia was, quote, removed to El Salvador because of an administrative error, end quote. The government said this to the court. Since then, the White House has done everything it can do to paint Abrego Garcia as anything but a father of three living in Maryland who had protected legal status in the United States. I repeat, protected legal status in the United States. You may not like this guy, you may think he's a bad guy, but the court said he could stay in the United States. It was Senator Chris Van Hollen's meeting with Abrego Garcia in El Salvador that we learned about just over 24 hours ago that really struck a nerve with a lot of people. Last night, the president of El Salvador mocked that meeting, saying, quote, Kilmar Abrego Garcia miraculously risen from the death camps and torture, now sipping margaritas with Senator Van Hollen in the tropical paradise of El Salvador, end quote. Today, Senator Van Hollen addressed that comment upon his return to the United States from El Salvador, accusing the Salvadoran government of trying to make it look like Abrego Garcia had been living comfortably, even trying to stage their meeting by the pool at the hotel where they met.
When I first sat down with Kilmar, we just had glasses of water on the table. I think maybe some coffee. And as we were talking, one of the government people came over and deposited 2 other glasses on the table with ice and I don't know if it was salt or sugar around the top, but they looked like margaritas. Nobody drank any margaritas or sugar water or whatever it is, but this is a lesson into the lengths that President Bukele will do to deceive people about what's going on. And it's also shows the lengths that the Trump administration and the president will go to, because when he was asked about a reporter about this, he just went along for the ride. They actually wanted to have the meeting by the side of the pool. Right, in the hotel, just right. I mean, this is a guy who's been in CCOT. This is a guy who's been detained. They want to create this appearance that life was just lovely for Kilmar, which of course is a big fat lie.
Hours before Senator Van Hollen arrived at Washington Dulles International Airport, Donald Trump reacted to the meeting with his own social media post saying, quote, Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland looked like a fool yesterday, standing in El Salvador, begging for attention from the fake news media or anyone. Grandstander. All right, not to be outdone, the White House official social media account posted its own tweet, editing a New York Times headline. Take a look at this. This is an official communication from the United States government, the White House managing to mock both Van Hollen's meeting with the Supreme Court, which ruled unanimously that the Trump administration must facilitate, as we just discussed, the release of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Joined by the family of Abrego Garcia today, Senator Van Hollen said this.
This case is not just about one man. It's about protecting the constitutional rights of everybody who resides in the United States of America. If you deny the constitutional rights of one man, you threaten the constitutional rights and due process for everyone else in America. Yes. The Fourth Circuit put it very clearly in its strong opinion yesterday, and I quote, "It is difficult in some cases to get to the very heart of the matter, but in this case, it is not hard at all. The government, in this case the Trump administration, is asserting a right to stash away residents of this country in foreign prisons without the semblance of due process that is the foundation of our constitutional order. Further, it claims, in essence, that because it has rid itself of custody, that there is nothing that can be done. This should be shocking not only to judges, but to the intuitive sense of liberty that Americans far removed from the courthouses still hold dear."
The threat to constitutional rights and due process by Donald Trump is giving immigrants who fled authoritarian countries deja vu. The Washington Post reports, quote, Carlos Cortez witnessed the charismatic Hugo Chavez test the limits of Venezuela's institutions after winning the presidency in 1998. The legislative branch became a rubber stamp, and the press co-opted or shut down. What followed, Cortez said, was the once unthinkable disintegration of one of Latin America's oldest democracies. You don't wake up one day and suddenly there's no democracy, he said. We had elections, we had institutions, we had laws, and then little by little, everything changed, end quote. In 1999, Hugo Chavez pushed for a special assembly to rewrite the Constitution. It stretched presidential terms to 6 years and allowed 2 consecutive terms. A decade later, he handily won a referendum on erasing term limits altogether. When Carlos Cortez arrived in the United States in 2016, he, quote, saw uncomfortable signs of Chavez in Trump, who was starting his first term. Our next guest is an advocate for democracy in Russia and around the world, frankly, and a former world chess champion. Garry Kasparov has a message for Americans on how America can avoid becoming Russia. Garry Kasparov writes in the Atlantic article, quote, exactly 20 years ago, I retired from professional chess to help Russia resist Putin's budding dictatorship. People were slow to grasp what was happening there, too. Putin's bad, but surely he'll stop short of, and you can fill in the blank with a dozen things he did to destroy Russia's fragile democracy and civil society, attacking the press as fake news and the enemy of the state. Check. Delegitimizing the judiciary, the last constitutional break when the legislature is co-opted and feckless. Check. Expanding influence over the economy by threatening businesses and using tariffs to introduce a crisis and spoils system. Check. Creating a culture of fear by persecuting unpopular individuals and groups. Been there, done all of that. America is hurtling toward the loss of its democratic institutions and the establishment of an authoritarian state where there will be no civil discussion of these issues at all. That's what a principled opposition must fight with all its might. When fighting for democracy, you never know if there will be another day. Fight everywhere you can, always, end quote. Joining me now, Garry Kasparov, the chair of the Renew Democracy Initiative and the author of the Substack, The Next Move with Garry Kasparov. Garry, nice to see you. Thank you for being with us. You know, when we talk about oligarchy, we talk about dictatorship, we talk about authoritarianism, to some people those remain abstractions, and very much like in Germany in the 1930s or in Russia, as you described, there are people who hope it won't go any farther than it goes, and then suddenly it does. What we've just been talking about on this show is people being disappeared, people being snatched up off the street, moved to other jurisdictions, in a couple of cases, other countries, and then the government saying, well, we don't know where they are, we can't get them back. This is the beginning of the stuff you're talking about.
Even under these awful circumstances.
Absolutely. Of course, American democracy is much more solid than Russian democracy or Venezuelan democracy, but it's not immune from being turned into something different. And I believe that it's my duty to share my experience, or experience many other dissidents who actually saw it. And many of the actions of the current administrations reminded us of what happened in our native countries. You just talked about this case of a person being shifted to a foreign prison. And I can remind the administration that some of the grievances of the Declaration of Independence 250 years ago reminded about this threat. So it's the depriving us of the benefit of a trial by jury, or transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses. So it seems that the founding fathers could feel this potential danger coming from the executive office. And I think that if you look at the combined effect of many of Trump's actions, clearly he's leading this way. And it's in my 2 articles in The Atlantic, that was the second one, when I described the potential Putinization of America.
Yes.
I found parallels, many parallels. And the key one is privatizing the levers of power and basically destroying the state and replacing it by the power of those who have proximity to power, but do not have legal rights to carry the operation.
Or not just legal rights, who are not able to be held to account in the same way. So if you take Elon Musk, for example, doing all sorts of things, and yet I can't hold him to account. He's an independent American citizen businessman.
Yes, but that tells us that we should stop arguing about policies. I don't want us to waste time whether Musk cut this or that, try to close one agency or another. That's very important. But we should start with the fact that DOGE is unconstitutional, period. So DOGE basically assumes powers that vested by Constitution in the Congress. I'm not aware about Congress giving this power to Elon Musk or a Senate having any confirmation hearings. And I think this is the key message. We have many differences. People who despise Trump and his actions, but we should stop arguing about policies now and concentrate, just to put all our efforts, in the thrust to defend Constitution. Next year is 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and the Republic is in real danger. And I can tell you that it's in 2026, the Democrats have a very good chance of taking back the House. Senate is probably unlikely, if it's a free and fair election. And Trump was already testing the will of people to fight back when he talks about the third term. Don't laugh at him.
So I want to ask you about this, Gary, because you used to have rules like this in Russia. And that's why Putin, in the last 25 years, spent a few years not as president of Russia, right? But Steve Bannon went on and said that on January 20th of 2029, Donald Trump will be inaugurated for his third term as president of the United States. And it becomes easy for some of us who think that's ridiculous, that's unconstitutional, that's not allowed, we're not going to pay any attention to that, to not pay any attention to that because somebody's working on this.
You must pay attention because it's many of the things that were presented in the so-called 2025 project were not taken seriously. Oh, of course, he would not go this way. It's too far. He will not cross this bridge or another. He will. The dictators and would-be authoritarian leaders, they never ask why. It's always why not. And they're looking for any flaw or a gap in constitutional order, in American laws. And unfortunately, many of the things that we took for granted, they are not codified, but simply kind of a tradition. Nobody ever did it before. Trump will do absolutely everything.
We didn't know this could happen.
And now we could see that.
And so one of the things, I want to read something that you wrote in your article, which I thought was remarkable. You said, to fight this onslaught means to stay focused. Skip the culture wars, where the ground can easily tilt to favor the MAGA faithful. Concentrate instead on defending American rights and values against billionaires and autocrats who want to take them away. Just because you can't compete with Trump on populism doesn't mean you can't be popular. Polls already suggest that the public believes the president should obey court orders and give Ukraine more aid. This is a fact. The polls are not with him.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole idea of this new Substack, the next move that I launched with my organization, Renew Democracy Initiative. It's about the strategy, how we should create a big tent. Again, for time being, to forget about differences, just not fighting culture wars, but concentrating on defending Constitution. Because many people who voted for Trump, they are really concerned about the threat Trump is posing to the constitutional order. We need to expand the coalition. We have to put more pressure on Republicans in the House and in the Senate to feel heat by being part of this Trump juggernaut that is aimed at destroying American Republic.
Gary, good to see you. Thank you, as always, for joining us. Gary Kasparov is the head of the Renew Democracy Initiative. He's the author of the Substack, The Next Move, with Gary Kasparov. All right, coming up, voters are showing up to town halls across the country to hold Republicans accountable for policies that are threatening the lives of all Americans, whether elected Republicans themselves show up or not. Our next guest has been a civil rights activist his entire life, and he's not going to remain silent against Trump's dismantling of democracy. The Democratic Congressman James Clyburn, standing by. He joins me next. And all next week across the country, voters will keep showing up at town halls, angry, frustrated, and in some cases afraid. Democrats are showing up in their own districts and in the districts where Republicans won't to listen to voters who are afraid of Donald Trump's tariffs and what those tariffs are doing to their small businesses, their ability to buy everyday essentials, and their ability to keep saving for retirement. Voters who are also afraid of what Republican-backed cuts to critical safety nets programs like Medicare will mean for their families. At the same time, many voters say they're also concerned about something even bigger, what this moment means for the future of American democracy. Last night at a town hall in South Carolina, the Democratic Congressman James Clyburn gave this warning about where we are and where we could be headed if we're not careful.
So all we can do is share with you what we're doing and ask for your prayers that this country will not allow itself to go the way of Germany in the 1930s, when people stood by. People are going to have to speak out because we don't have 218 votes. in the House. We need 218. We don't have 60 votes in the Senate. We need 60 votes.
That's not just political frustration. That's a stark historical warning. Joining us now is the former assistant Democratic leader in the House of Representatives, Congressman James Clyburn of South Carolina, whom many know as a civil rights leader, as a member of Congress, but I know, because he comes on my show a lot on the weekends, as a teacher, a history student. You study history, and the 1930s Germany thing is really, really, really important to remember, because Germany in the 1930s was one of the most advanced scientifically, artistically, culturally, educationally, one of the most advanced countries on earth by a long shot. And most people in Germany it would have been reasonable to say, one man can't destroy this. It's too much. We're too strong. We're too stable. And yet, one man and those who supported him did destroy it and made it into dust, essentially.
Absolutely. You're so right about that. And thank you so much. Also, last night, I put up on the screen for everybody in that auditorium to see that poem, that statement made by Pastor Naber Namolia, who put out the litany of events, starting with first they came for the communists, and went right down through the litany of things, the trade unionists, the Jews, and as he concluded, finally, they came for me. And by that time, nobody was left to speak up. I put that up last night so that my audience could see what the similarities are. Doing away with trade unions, doing away with the media. And then I also put up for them the statement from the Birmingham City Jail, that letter from that jail by Martin Luther King Jr. when he wrote that we are going to be made to repent in this generation, not just for the vitriolic words and deeds of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of good people. King warned us in that letter that the people of ill will were making a much better use of time than the people of goodwill. And that seems to be what's taking place today. You know, I got started in my activism reading Martin Luther King Jr.'s first book, which was Stride Toward Freedom. I keep near me his last book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? And I think that foretells exactly where we are today. Are we going to settle for chaos, or will we build a community? And that's what I tried to share with my attendees last night, and it was a great meeting.
Congressman, there are a lot of brave people around the country who are doing remarkable things, some in Congress, some out there in the community. This weekend, tomorrow, we're going to see possibly 400 events around the country. You know, in the beginning, after this election, there are people who said the protest movement didn't have the energy that it did after the 2016 election of Donald Trump. But it's different. It's a little more focused. It's about accountability. There are valid criticisms out there about the fact that there is not a cohesive message coming from the Democratic Party. What's your take on that?
Well, I think the message that comes from the Democratic Party is a good message. The problem we've got, is that we have to depend upon the media to deliver it. If we have the Washington Post, for instance, caving to this wannabe dictator, and we've got other media entities that seem to rather push a narrative that will bring eyes to their newspapers or to their television sets, and not really give a fair hearing or reporting to what we're doing. I'm going to be doing 3 town halls next week. 2 of them will not be in my district. I'll be up in Spartanburg, South Carolina. I'll be in Greenville. I'm going to be down in Beaufort. These places are not in my congressional district. And I would hope that there are people outside of the audience taking in what we're saying, because my message is going to be very, very coherent. It's going to be a little bit alarming, but it's going to be a message that I think everybody will understand if they were to hear it. And I have to rely upon people like yourself. You do a great job of this. That's why I like coming on your shows on the weekends, because you do a real good, substantive reporting of what the issues are around us. But when you've got people saying we're not going to fact check, we're not going to worry about whether or not you're telling the truth, and just let the reports go out there, that's what's killing us as Democrats, because we don't have a stomach for just lying.
Well, you and I both have work to do. Thank you for doing your part of it, sir. We'll talk to you soon. As always, we always appreciate your time. Congressman James Clyburn of South Carolina. All right, coming up, it is not